If you want to have sustainable growth, you are not going to have the solutions all the time.
Mm.
You cannot, right? It doesn't work that way. When you build a team, there are a number of different roles on that team, and every role has to be valued. And therefore, everyone in those roles have to feel valued. And there is one of the most efficient ways to make people feel valued is to ask them what is working.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, we are tackling another question that has come up for Nate and I as we've spoken to owners of seven-figure music schools. So, hey, Nate, you ready to jump into this?
Yeah, and I love this question, Daniel, because it's very people-focused, which I love, talking about our teachers.
Yes. So if this is your first episode, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. Nate and I have been speaking, as I mentioned, to owners of seven-figure music schools and collecting a number of questions for folks who either already have a school of that size or aspire to a school of that size. And what we're doing here is unpacking answers both from Nate's experience and my experience, and just kind of laying out some concrete, measurable things that each person can do, or a studio owner, school owner can do to scale up. So today's question, the thing we're going to tackle is, how do you make your teachers feel valued? How do you make your teachers feel valued in your school? Now, like I said, this has come up multiple times as we kind of surveyed and had conversations with school owners. This came up repeatedly. And so I thought, hey, this is something we got to tackle really early. So Nate, I know you're going to drop some valuable practical wisdom here, wisdom from the trenches, but maybe let's start. Let's preface all of this. Could you tell me, and I know you're going to, like I said, I know you're going to drop some practical steps or principles here, but could you start by giving me some measurable results that you've seen in BMF by doing some of the things that we're going to talk about, maybe a before and after? So, 10 years ago when BMF first got started and was kind of scaling up, you saw a certain result, or you had a certain expectation about what you could expect from your teachers, and now you have a different experience. So what is the before and after for Brooklyn Music Factory?
Yeah, great opener. Before we dive into the sort of the principles that we practice at Brooklyn Music Factory, I, much like many of our listeners, when we started this thing, it was a very personal endeavor, right? So Brooklyn Music Factory was my piano studio that expanded into a multi-teacher studio, right? That's a very common story we hear over and over. And so the early investment into teachers was really just the network I knew reaching out and saying, I'm going to hire a handful of friends that I played gigs with around New York, et cetera. I'm sure this is resonating with others, right? We don't realize that what we're actually doing is building a school and going to be hiring educators that also happen to be great musicians. And so the before was, I would hire friends that, still many of them are very good friends that were great musicians that may have also aspired to educate. And as a result, we just kind of dove in there and sort of made it up as we went along, but everybody was in their own kind of individual channel, right? And the difference now, 12 years later, is that first of all, we're hiring educators. Second of all, we're constantly collaborating around what it is that the student experience is going to have. And our goal is always a universal experience across the entire school so that we can do what's most important, which is serve our students and their families. So what I mean by that is now I can very confidently take a student of mine who's ready to move on to another teacher for various reasons, might be because she has she's at a specific growth stage in her journey, et cetera. But I can very confidently, within the school, move a student from teacher to teacher to teacher, knowing that they're going to have a consistent experience. And how does that change the game for us as music school owners, Daniel, is that it makes us so much more confident in the experience for all the families. And as a result, so much more confident in the retention of students. And as a result, it relieves so much operational pressure on us as owners and anxiety around kind of micromanaging all of these different teachers who are really the ones who have that intimate relationship with the family. So you're trying to, like, I don't know if that really answers the question in terms of exact metrics, but retention is one of the biggest concerns for us, right?
Retention
Because
of teachers or retention of students?
both.
Right.
Because you retain great teachers, you retain their students, and then as you pass students between great teachers, it becomes a culture of the entire program. So anyways, let's get into some real things that we practice at Brooklyn Music Factory that might be valuable for others. But the difference is that we hire with a whole new level of confidence, and we move our students through teachers and transition them from one teacher to the other to the next with a whole new level of confidence than I had, say, even 5-6 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay, so speaking as someone who's had an opportunity to look into a lot of music schools, including yours, a lot of times the sense that I get when school owners ask this question, how do you make your teachers feel valued? The sense that I get, because I've actually followed up and asked them, the reason they're asking this question is because they want those teachers to be as committed to the success of the school's students as the owner is.
Yes.
So it's almost this idea of, I want the teachers to feel valued so that I can get something back from them. And the thing that I want to get back from them is that they care. So I'll earn that teacher's loyalty and their hard work if I make them feel valued. And so a lot of times I get this sense that it's almost like relational accounting. Oh, if I do these things for the teachers, then what I'll get back from them is this. But I gotta be honest, that's a little creepy.
It's totally creepy, dude. It's a values issue, and it's I love that, because you're right. I mean, you even said this to me earlier. You're like, well, Nate, it's a little like too abstract for people to wrap their head around. But I don't think, I mean, your comment creepy really hits it home, dude. It is not abstract to say, what is my reasoning behind investing in these teachers, in these employees? It in fact means that A, you care about the person, B, you care about your families because this person is the one who's following through in service to the families, and C, you're aware that you're working on something greater than yourself. That's the key with the comment. This is how I translate the comment you just made, Daniel, which is that as business owners, things get all very metric-y and profit-y and dollars and da-da-da-da-da. And we will never sustain growth if our end goal is always, how much money, how can I maximize these humans for my benefit?
Exactly. And so before we jump into these principles, I wanted to say that because to summarize the last 5 or 10 minutes that we've been talking, what I'm hearing from you is there are these principles, and if enacted, you will have a consistent experience for the students in your school so that you can trust that the job is being done well. And by inserting that comment I just inserted there, it's a almost a foundational thought that undergirds these principles. It's a principle beneath the principle that if you're using this as if it's a formula to get what you want out of someone, it's very possible that though these are really smart principles, that it might backfire, might blow up in your face, or might just not work. There does have to be an authenticity behind this. This isn't just a cut and paste formula. There has to be authenticity. There has to be true care about the humans that you've put on your team, right?
Yes, dude. Yeah. And all you have to do, Daniel, is ask yourself, for those that are listening, are you one of those school owners or studio owners that doesn't trust your teachers,
Hmm.
i.e., will your teacher leave tomorrow and take all of her students?
Hmm.
You just have to, I mean, that's a hard look in the mirror, right? That's a man in the mirror moment where you're like, how do I actually feel about these people? So, anyways, let's dive into the actions you can take that we take at BMF, with like all of you, varying degrees of success. You're not predicting the outcome. All we're doing here is committing to action.
Okay.
That's the key for us. Okay, so let's dive in.
Okay. So, in answer to the question, how do you get your teachers to be as committed as you are to the success of their students? There's a couple of principles that I think are valuable. What's that first principle, Nate?
Yeah,
What's the first thing you
I'm
do?
gonna give you all three, and then we'll
Interesting. I love it.
dive into number one. Number one is you need to actually spend time co-teaching with your teachers.
Hmm.
Right? You need to get in the ring with them. Right? We work with a client now, Daniel, who is just such a total badass, amazing, has an amazing school, and she invests 40 hours of her time into each new hire.
Over the course
Woo!
of how long?
Yeah, I'd say a few months,
Okay. All right.
right? So
In in
that's
in in service of summarizing very briefly. So that's number one. We're going to co-teach students with. What's
yes.
number two?
Number two is you need to create a rhythm of both department meetings where you're bringing all the teachers and you together, as well as one-on-one check-ins. In
Okay.
other words, those are that one-on-one coaching time where you're actually spending time with each teacher and just acting as a listener, right?
Okay. So
And
as
then,
the owner, you're investing money and time
yeah,
with
and
the
then the
teaching staff.
final one
Okay.
is you need to get to the point where you are asking your teachers how we can do our job better.
Okay.
Right.
How do,
That's it. So how can we succeed? How can I improve as a teacher, and how can we as a community improve in our purpose, our mission?
okay. So let's jump into that first principle. But before I do that, Nate, and maybe you can't answer this, and I feel like to some degree I can answer this a little bit, but and let's not spend too much time here. But um, do you get the sense that this is something that most school owners, let's say 200 students, 500 students, 1,000 students, they already know to do these things and um, and are doing them? Or do you get the sense that this is something that, just in your experience in the industry, some or most of these things aren't being done by other school owners? Just your brief thought on that.
Yeah, I think it's like so many of the principles and so many of the questions that we unpack on this podcast. I and other school owners all understand that there could be a better way to do things. We understand that we need to refine how we operate as a school, especially as we grow, but it's very difficult to actually implement them into the rhythm of your week, your month, your quarter, your year as an owner,
Okay.
and commit to consistently doing them. So we've been doing department meetings and one-on-one check-ins for, I don't know, well over half 6 years, 7, 8, 9 years.
Okay.
And so it's just that simple. It's like we know it, we write it down in our journal. We're like, I got to start doing this. I just heard about it. It's a good choice. But the actual follow through is really the challenge. And so, truthfully, dude, I'm here to just, when you're asking me a question like this and we're sharing BMF story, I really want people to know, like, yeah, there are other programs that are doing this. Warts and all, we're following through on it.
Hmm.
It ain't always pretty, but we're doing it.
That makes sense. And I think in unpacking these three principles, there's probably going to be some practical wisdom that if we sat down with a group of 10 schools that were doing, let's say, co-teaching their students, the owners or the department heads are co-teaching students, we'd get little nuggets of wisdom from each person that looks different than a different school. So maybe let's not dwell on that anymore and just jump into that first thing. So when you talk about co-teaching uh, students with your teachers, maybe just if you feel it valuable, describe what that looks like. How often do you do it? You mentioned our one client who spends 40 hours doing this at the
Yeah.
beginning. We just spend a minute or two unpacking that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about exactly the what. Like, what does that look like when you're in the classroom? First of all, we don't do 40 hours of co-teaching, like the client I was just talking about. That's awesome that she's baked that into her rhythm, but we don't do that. We do we do a handful of them, and then we make different people like our private lesson director and myself available to go into the classroom as needed when the new teacher or an old teacher requests. So what does that look like? For us, we're a game-based program. We're a songwriting program. We have our own unique curriculum. So what'll often happen in the beginning is I'll literally go into the studio, and our teacher will be there, and I just walk in. We start with a 5-minute open improvisation with every student, whether they're 4 or 14 or 44. So I go in there, I grab an African drum, this little 5-year-old grabs a drum, I set the 5-minute timer, and that teacher just observes me. So then I move from there to one of our ear training games. We call them big music games. I move into an ear training game. Again, the teacher's observing. Now, here's the key. I'm asking the teacher to take notes and to come back to me in Slack. They'll literally Slack me questions, 3 to 5 questions they had. And then I also ask them, what did you observe that worked? So I'm asking them to take notes as if they're actually almost like in a little class, right? They're studying and they're taking notes, and then they're coming back with some questions. Okay, so that's actually what's happening. If we then move on to the gig song, where we're working on the songwriter's journey, and I'm teaching them some technique, maybe they're learning chord progressions or whatever, they'll watch me. And the important thing to remember here, Daniel, is that
the underlying principle, I'd love to hear this.
Yeah, the underlying principle is the following. These teachers are watching the founder, like let's take it's a 5-year-old piano student. They're watching the founder walk into the room, sit cross-legged on the floor with this little girl, connect and do a 5-minute improvisation, live out the curriculum, and then most importantly, they're watching how I'm interacting with this other human. And we have a core value called 100% engaged emotionally and intellectually. They're watching that, hey, here's a guy that runs a 7-figure music school that's coming in and having a really authentic experience with this student around the curriculum that matters to that school. And then they are required to come back to this founder and say, hey, I observed 2 or 3 things that are really valuable that I'm going to implement in my next lesson. And I still have a few questions for you. And so what you're basically doing there, the underlying principle is, as a founder or a trainer or a school owner or whatever role you're in, you're saying, hey, watch, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm coming in. You're just, it's sort of like in medical school, when all the medical students will stand in they'll be in the operating room up, on this, looking into the surgery while the surgeon's working, right? So you have all of these students that are studying what's happening, madly taking notes on what's going on and understanding the rhythm of the room. And that's what these other teachers do, especially if you're working with younger teachers that may not be really experienced educators yet. They oftentimes are picking up on the most simple things like, oh, Nate always sets a timer, yet he's been teaching for 32 years. When he says we use timers through the 45-minute lesson and time every section of it, he really means it. I mean, dude's still doing it.
Yeah.
So that's the principle, is like, ask them to be engaged and come back to you with observations and questions.
Now, so let's go back to the actual question we're asking for the episode. What evidence have you seen personally that in doing this co-teaching or this observation, that it's building towards greater teacher retention and greater teacher loyalty and
let's say investment
and connection with your vision? Investment with your vision. How do you see that connecting?
So we've heard, we had a teacher who just recently went back to her home in Australia, but she said this quote to me that just totally stuck with me that I wrote in my journal. She said, Nate, I've never worked in a program that was so curious. And why is that so important to me? Well, because when we say investment, what I really mean is, we have these 7 core values. These are the things that are so important to us. No matter how our day is going, these are how we serve our families. And one of them is discover everyone's story. And this teacher says this, and I say, she's using language that is a core value of ours, and we're clearly living it as a community. So what do I mean by when you go back and you co-teach with the teacher? Well, first of all, you're giving your time to the teacher. There is nothing more valuable than time.
So they feel that sense of investment in them, and you're saying that turns around and
they come
it's
back
reciprocity. Yeah.
Yes, it's reciprocity. You're investing time into them and you are challenging them. And everybody who's going to stay on the job site is going to stay on the job site not because of the wage. They're going to stay on the job site because of a sense of belonging and a sense of challenge and a sense of opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? That's why people stay. Now, I like better to say we want our teachers to be invested rather than sort of loyal or stay forever. Because Daniel, you and I both know, I mean, we've gone through like 3 different, revisions of our entire career in life. We can't control where we're going to be, we can't control our teachers and their long view life plan. All we can do is ask for really 100% engagement and investment right now, right here, while we're serving these families.
Now, I think that leads to, this isn't one of the 3 principles that you came in to talk about, but I think that leads to a principle that I find important. And having hired teachers myself, having hired support staff for, my studio business, my consulting business, those sorts of things, there is a sense that a skill that one can develop is that ability to sit with a person, talk with a person, have an interview with a person that you're considering bringing onto your team, and knowing if that person's going to be a good fit. And, the purpose of this episode is not to get into hiring or things of that nature, but with that sense of investment, I can just imagine people listening to this or watching this might say, well, I have invested. I've cut my veins open and bled for this school. I have invested in teachers, and they've just left without thought. And so I think, again, the danger of hearing some principles like this and saying, oh, so if I do this, it equals that. Again, it gets back to that creepy comment I made at the beginning. There is a corresponding side, that there is a skill to know whether you should invest in someone. And too often I see small business owners hire quickly and fire slowly, when it should be the exact opposite. You should
hire slowly,
very careful in how you hire, and you should be very fast to help someone discover what they should actually be doing, or help move them into an opportunity that's better suited to their skills or what their vision is, and not keep them around. And I can point back over the past 5 years and point to people that I help move out of the various companies that I own or run or manage or co-manage. And it was better for everyone involved, sometimes in less than 30 days after I'd made that hiring decision. So I just want to put this principle in the greater context of, please don't invest in beachfront property in Idaho. Please don't do this kind of investment unless you know that the person sitting across the table from you, you get that sense that they are, this is tough to say, not worthy of that investment, but you get the sense from them that they are just as invested right at the beginning as they should be, and they're sending those signals. So let's move on to the second principle. Let's
do that, but let's commit right here, dude, to our listeners that we will do an episode on hiring funnels.
Sure.
I am more than happy to share stories of where I just totally dropped the ball, hired too quickly, fired too slowly, because it looks great on paper and it sounds great on a podcast. It really looks good in a book, but putting it into practice can be ass kicking hard. Okay, so second principle. And here's the thing about investment is you have to set up a rhythm in your school or studio where you're going to be consistent and consistently coming back to those teachers.
Right.
They can't feel like it's a one and done. Like It's not Nate's available to come teach the 5-year-old student once, and then, that teacher's like, well, I never saw Nate again.
Hmm.
No, it's that I say, anytime you want me to come in and demonstrate a game, anytime you want me to come in and do a 5-minute warm up with your student, I'm so psyched to do that. You can invite me, I can come in for 10 minutes. You just let me know what your needs are, and I'll come in and demo anything. Right? Or you want me to come in and observe and give feedback, which, by the way, is a second step in that, right? When you're co-teaching, you also then want to watch your teacher teach and give her the same feedback that she gave you. I observed a couple things here. I have a few questions there. Okay, so let's get to that second principle, though, which is, setting up department meetings, setting up one-on-one check-ins. Okay, they have very different roles.
Let's hear that.
Okay, so the department meeting is where you're bringing your 5 piano teachers together, and you have an agenda where you open, like, here's how our agenda looks. I'm going to just sort of give a quick overview.
Love it.
But we open with a positive focus. We open all our meetings with a positive focus. So just what's one thing from your week as a teacher at the school that you're feeling really optimistic about? That takes 5 minutes. You'd be like, 5 minutes of time that I'm paying all these people to show up to the department meeting? Well, yeah, because you're building this sense of community. You want everybody to be able to tell their story out of the gate. Then the second thing we do is we literally have a GDoc open. I mean, Ben runs our private lesson department meetings as the director, and I sit in them. I'm a piano teacher, right? In addition to being an owner. And so next thing he says is, okay, great. We're a game-based program. We have literally hundreds of games, ear training and theory games we play with our students. He says, what's one game or activity that's really working well for you this week? And everybody will list in the GDoc. They'll even go like hyperlink to the how to play the game or the video demo of the game, and they'll put it in there.
Do they do this prior to the meeting or during the meeting?
During the meeting, real time, because you're paying them for your time.
Now, for another studio that maybe isn't using hundreds of games, what's the corresponding principle that someone in another studio could apply, given that there's so many different ways to run a music school?
Yeah, totally.
What are you really getting at here?
What we're really getting at here is, so if you're running, let's say you're running a piano school, you likely have 1 or 2 methods that you're using, right? And basically what you're saying is, what's a part of that curriculum that's really resonating with the teacher right now? And does she have an approach to it that she's excited to share? Because that gets us to the next part of the meeting, which is, who would like to dive in deep? Actually, we do it a little differently. We have everybody else, and this is an important little tweak. But the underlying concept is, you want people to share an element of a method that they're using with their piano student. I'm just using a piano studio as an example, that is resonating with them this week. And why is that important for us as a director or a founder? Is because we want to be so mindful that every single lesson is actually an intentional lesson that it provides a really, really valuable experience. We all know when we've phoned in a lesson, right? Teachers, the last thing we can have in our school is teachers that are just sort of dialing in, phoning in the lesson. It's another 30-minute lesson with a student that didn't practice. And the next thing you know, you sort of have the investment by teachers goes down, click by click by click. And to them, it's just another opportunity to make some money, right? And so we're trying to, with these department meetings, we're saying, everybody be public about what's working. And then let's actually go to them and say, hey, everybody's looking at a list of sort of ideas. Let's just call them ideas that seem to be working right now. I want someone who didn't write the idea, right? I want somebody else to point to someone else's idea and say, hey, I'd love to know more about that. Now you're asking that other teacher in the department meeting in a public setting, right, to share her passion for that idea that's working in her studio. The last part is what we call the hot seat, right? I learned this in some leadership training for business, all types of businesses. And the hot seat is really straightforward. You just say, okay, who's really struggling? And someone always raises their hand and it's like, I'm struggling with this student who, I'm struggling with a mom who's demanding to see more progress out of her 7-year-old student who doesn't practice. Okay, that's an issue that I'm sure resonates with everybody who's listening. Okay, so that hot seat then follows the form where we basically, everybody asks open-ended discovery questions to this teacher. And this teacher and the idea is, tell me, an open-ended question means they're not asking for a specific answer. They're just saying, it's more like, tell me more about X. Tell me more about Y. And then that'll last 5 or 10 minutes. And what you're really trying to do is unpack what the real issue is. Because it's usually not like mom's just being annoying. Oftentimes a hot seat issue like that will be around a teacher struggling with communication with a parent. They're not sure how to communicate the journey of our musicians at Brooklyn Music Factory. So they need actually some ideas from everyone else about how to communicate with a really aggressive parent who wants to see the type of metrics that she was expecting from the program, but Brooklyn Music Factory measures in a very unique way. So anyways, then what happens is after you've had all these open-ended questions, mind you, all these other teachers are asking the questions. It's not me asking the question. It's not Ben, the private lesson director, asking the question. So the other teachers being like, tell me more, tell me more. They're engaged in the success of this other teacher. And then they all come back with solutions. Hey, this reminds me of a family, and they talk about what's worked for them. That's sort of a hot seat format that can take like 10 to 20 minutes. And one teacher really becomes the focal point. And it gets back to your comment of investment, Daniel. When that teacher gets 20 minutes of the entire department's time to help her solve an issue with one student, how do you think that makes them feel?
Yeah, it communicates a lot both to the asker and the onlooker.
100%.
Yeah.
And, it's just, that's basically the hour. That is the department meeting. There's a couple announcements. Hey, you need to do this, you need to do this. But actually, we got a lot of feedback. We always in exit interviews with teachers when they're leaving. I always do an exit interview with them. And I'm like, hey, what's working at BMF? Why did what works really well? And then I spend most of my time saying, hey, what's kind of annoying? What did you not like about being part of this teaching community? And so some of the feedback we got over the last couple of years around the department meetings was like, hey, I don't need all the logistics. I don't need the school calendar. I don't need to talk about when the next gig is. All of that can come just in a Slack, or in an email or whatever, however you communicate. Let's stay focused on the games. Let's take focused on hot seat issues. That's really what we care about. So our meeting is primarily that.
If the mission of the school is the education of the students, it makes sense that the focus of those department meetings and one-on-ones will be the mission of the school.
So yeah, totally. Improving the experience, the education experience. Yeah.
It's very similar to advice I was given in marriage counseling, that if all you talk about with your spouse is who's picking up this kid at what time, that relationship is going to get strained over time. You got to focus on the important things. So I think the same thing goes in the school. So before we move on to principle 3, what I'm really picking up in those first 2 principles is just this sense of we're investing time and money into the team, and the team picks up on that. And again, to highlight what I had said earlier, it's important that we as owners show up to the job site non-anxious, that we're clear, that we are not trying to manipulate our staff, that we're not trying to game our staff. And if we do try that, these things aren't going to work. If we're showing up authentically, then it comes across as authentic. But you said something there just a second ago, which I think leads perfectly into the 3rd principle, which is we actually need to talk to our team, our teachers, in this pursuit of building a team of teachers that is invested in the success of the students, that's invested in the mission of the school, and gets that sense from the owner that they're valued. We actually need to ask them for advice on how to succeed. And can you maybe even rephrase that in your own words. When you say ask them for advice on how to succeed, maybe just give me like a 30-second version of, what does even mean to succeed, or what do you mean by that statement?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said because you hit it perfectly. Like our mission, in a place like Brooklyn Music Factory, we have a very clear purpose, which is, we have a unique curriculum that is designed to inspire our musicians and to build their community, i.e., learn how to write songs and collaborate with other students. And we want them to have an experience where they will continue to want to collaborate with musicians for the rest of their life. We're not a school where you come to be guaranteed to get into Juilliard. That's not in our purpose or mission. We have plenty of students that go on to, New England Conservatory and all these other great schools, but it's not our mission, and there's some great schools. I mean, we're in New York. There's great schools where that's the mission. We will get your kid into Juilliard. Dig it? That's not our mission. So you said it perfectly. You're like, well, if you need to invest in the mission. So our department meeting is we're stating out loud, what are we doing successfully that's building collaboration amongst our students?
So when you say ask them for advice on how to succeed, how do we, there is a part of this that you're very connected to the mission of the school, i.e.,
yes,
when my partner and I were running the Piano Express together, the summer camp, our goal was to get kids through 100 pages of music. Kids who had never studied the piano before, get them through 100 pages of music in 1 week. Perfect. And so if I'm sitting down with our interns and our staff, we're talking to them about, hey, how can we better do that? What problems are you seeing? How do you think we should do this? Because, me and Greg here, we're the so-called experts, but it would be incredibly arrogant of us not to ask for the advice of the people that we've hired who we believe in and get feedback from them. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
And dude, this is not a judgment on missions. That is a beautiful example because it's a radically different mission than the one for Brooklyn Music Factory. I love that mission. Piano Express, 100 pages of music within X amount of time. So then
we ran it as a summer camp. Yeah.
It's a summer camp. Great. So you go back to your team weekly and you're like, how are we doing? Who's on page what? Oh, you're on page 42 and you're only on week 3. Please share with the team what's working so well for you. You're only on page 9. Okay, let's hot seat that and figure out where your roadblocks are, right? And then as a community, you're collaborating to find solutions. Because here's another vital point, because we're talking about sustainable growth in a school.
Yes.
And so this is so valuable. We talk about this all the time because if you want to have sustainable growth, you are not going to have the solutions all the time. You cannot, right? It doesn't work that way. When you build a team, there are a number of different roles on that team, and every role has to be valued. And therefore, everyone in those roles have to feel valued. And there is one of the most efficient ways to make people feel valued is to ask them what is working. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them how they're doing in lessons. Ask them how they're doing at home. Like literally authentically be aware of this person as a really valuable asset to the community, and then ask them for advice that will benefit the entire community. The key here too, Daniel, and this is a little bit subtle, but I realize when I talk about these department meetings, when I talk about the hot seat format is literally the outcome. Your definition of success in a hot seat is that one teacher has an issue, the entire community helps come up with a committed action for that teacher. And guess what? Throughout the 20-minute process, everyone in the community benefits because there's usually about 4 or 5 other teachers that are like, oh, wait, I'm totally going to implement that as well. That's brilliant.
100%. Yes.
Right?
My own experience bears this out in that when we were teaching younger teaching staff how to teach group the way that I teach group, I'd get questions like, well, how do you get them to understand dotted quarter notes so quickly?
Hmm.
Um, and that is where I would come in and maybe actually on the spot show them how I did that. But over time, it got to the point where other teachers that I had trained had their own input on that,
Yes.
and they could actually do that uh, demonstration or their own version of it. And then it gets to the point where they're not even coming to me anymore. They might just come to that, senior level teacher that has the great answer. And it's at that point that you have what you said there, that sustainable growth, that scalable growth, because it
Yes.
doesn't make sense that every single educational, administrative, marketing problem can be answered by the CEO. And if it can, you are going to hit a limit at some point as to
Hmm.
how big your business can get.
It's 100% the case. And maybe this is a good closer on our episode. I don't even know if we're done, but I want to
I
go
feel like
back
we
to,
are.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're getting close. Um, there's a lot of nuggets in this one too. And some of them will feel big, like how am I ever going to get organized and run a department meeting every month? We do it once a month. We do an all staff meeting first Friday of the month. We do a department meetings by instrument once a month. And then the other 2 weeks of the month, we do what are called one-on-one check-ins. And this is what I wanted to close with. Remember how I said the department meeting serves a very different function than the one-on-one check-in. So as a founder or as a director of a department, the one-on-one check-in is so straightforward. You just book literally 15 minutes with a little 15-minute buffer because sometimes they go over. 15 minutes, not a lot of time. The teacher meets with you and you just simply ask, hey, how's it going? Notice the pause. Tell me more. Huh, is there any way I can help you? Tell me more. Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for the input. Let me circle back with you on that answer. Notice the one-on-one check-in. What are we actually doing in that check-in? Someone described it to me perfectly, which is that without the one-on-one check-ins, the toxins build up in your business. With a one-on-one check-in, it's an opportunity to work all the toxins out in a very authentic way. In other words, every one of your teachers always has something on their mind. They're not comfortable sharing it in the department meeting, but you're giving them one-on-one check-ins and they will share it with you directly. Hey, I was just, sometimes it's so simple. Hey, I know we have a concert coming up in 3 months on, May 12th, but I actually just got called for a gig where I get to go out of town and make a ton of money. Is there any way we could work through that so that I wouldn't have to be at that concert? Now you're like, huh. If you give them the opportunity to just raise questions with you and ask for help, you are actually you are basically redirecting everything so that you don't come into one of those toxic situations where it's like a week before that concert, the teacher announces that they're not going to be there, yet they have 8 of their students on it. Because 3 months, 4 months earlier, you made yourself available and just said, hey, tell me about it. What's on your mind? So that one-on-one check-in is just, you don't have to have a real agenda. You don't have to say, I need to learn X, Y, and Z, otherwise it's not worth my time. All you have to do is show up and be present for this other human for 15 minutes and ask them what's on their mind.
Hmm.
We do that with our clients, dude. We start with it like just a top of mind. I literally set my timer for 5 minutes. They want to dive right into solutions. I'm just like, what's top of mind? And they'll talk. This happened yesterday. She talked for like a minute and a half, and I was like, you still have 3.5 minutes. What else is top of mind?
Hmm.
Because you're eventually that thing that's really nagging at the teacher is going to come up.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I feel like that's a good closer because that's where you can really do an ego check as an owner. You can be like, what you said, Daniel, we're trying to grow a sustainable business. It's going to rely on a team of people. And do we really, genuinely, authentically, are we ready to care for each one of those people?
Yeah.
We're ready to show up with compassion and care. And yes, you're right. Your comment from like 20 minutes ago around, man, we're bleeding for this thing. What do you mean? I'm giving it all. That's different. That might just frankly be a misuse of our resources and time. We might get a lot more bang for the buck by doing that 15-minute one check-in with all of our staff each week, each month,
Mm.
you know, than we would hammering out and investing in Facebook ads.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anywho,
I do think it goes back to that that skill development side that we haven't talked about as much today, but that that side of being the owner, the CEO, that can recognize when someone is a good fit for our team and not. And when you find those
yes.
good fits, you just pile the investment into that person. And
Mm,
and so if one finds himself investing and it not quote unquote paying off, there could be a deeper issue going on there. So yeah, so I think to summarize, to come back to that first question, how do you get your teachers to be as committed as you are to the success of their students? I think these three principles are, or four, if you count the one that I put in there, I think are a really, really strong base to work from. And what I would suggest to folks who are listening to this, or if you're watching it, if there's an opportunity to leave something in a comment or leave feedback somewhere, wherever you're consuming this episode, I'd love to hear what principles have worked for you. I'd love to hear how
yes.
how you've already implemented these principles, but maybe you have a different way that you've implemented them, or you have practical examples. I think we can crowdsource a lot of wisdom, and I think we've jumped back and forth between practical execution and deep underlying principles, and I hope that this and I trust that this episode will be really helpful for folks who are in somewhere in their journey.